This is a quick little review of the Genesis, other known as in Spanish Hennessy 150 SX. It's a single cylinder, single carbureted, I guess you would call it dual sport / adventure bike. And I've owned every kind of motorcycle you've imagined. I've been riding motorcycles since I was young, dirt bikes. I've had Hayabusas, VMAXs, GS6Rs, Harleys. And when because I'm a tourist here, I buy, basically I rent from, I have to own a business here or be a resident to actually own the vehicle myself. So what I do is I just basically get somebody to get the bike for me, and I either pay them in full for it and they own it and we work a contract out, or I just pay them rent every month. And so you can see it's a really simple setup: single carburetor, single cylinder engine. I've been really impressed. I've had this for like 6 months now. I've put 12,000 kilometers on it. The thing that I did is it had a 19-inch rim on the front. I put a 17 on the front. I left the 17 on the back, but I changed the rims out. The rims are higher quality, much lighter. I'm a big dude. I'm 255 pounds. And this bike, I was actually shocked. I thought, well, there's no way this bike's going to be... Once I got it through the break-in period, I can rev the living daylights out of this thing. And as long as you work the gears well, I have no problem going up hills. It works hard, especially if I have a passenger on the back. But I'm actually going to be upgrading to the 250 here soon. The reason I decided to go with the Genesis or the Hennessy, some people have complained about reliability. I haven't found that to be a problem. Like, yeah, some of the parts, like this exhaust, is a little, it's rusting a little bit, but you can get an aftermarket exhaust for this thing for dirt cheap. My headlight went out after a couple months. So I put a LED in there and it's way better than the original. The ignition went out a couple months ago. It cost me $10 to replace. It's way better than the original. So you can upgrade a lot of these parts. And I do the maintenance every 1,000 kilometers. I know that sounds crazy. They recommend every 1,500 kilometers. But you got to understand, this is only 1 quart of oil. And I'm riding this thing. This thing will do a good 100 kilometers top speed. You got to understand, though, here in Nicaragua, the highways, the highest speed you'll find is 80 kilometers an hour. So it's plenty of bike. It's got a lot of good low end, especially if you know how to ride it. I actually enjoy riding this bike more than I enjoyed riding my Hayabusa and a lot of my 1,000cc bikes, because I can literally go and ride this bike all out. I can crank the throttle as hard as I want to. I don't have to worry about flipping the bike over. It's very forgiving in the corners. Having the smaller wheel in the front makes it really good on the street. These are Kendall tires. The bike I'm upgrading to has a 6th gear. So I actually found some Dunlop tires for it, which are a little more expensive here in Nicaragua, but that's totally fine because I'm going to be riding at higher speeds. I wanted the 6th gear for highway riding. The roads here are amazing. You don't really I'm going to be going on an adventure tour in Ecuador here in a few months. And I've been looking at the bike selections and I'm like, do I really need a Tiger 900 or a Super Tenere 700? Not really. I'm looking at some of the, some of the roads here. There's a lot of dirt roads here, which is good. There's a lot of shortcuts you can take, but during the rainy season, half the road, even the paved roads, you're coming along, there might be a whole section of road that's washed out or a tree that's fallen on the road. I can lift this bike, and I have lifted this bike up and lifted it over trees. I've lifted it. I've carried it across really sketchy places and rivers. So you can literally do anything with this bike. You can fix it on the side of the road. I've seen people rebuild the engine of this bike on the side of the road. So it's virtually indestructible if you do the maintenance. I can get a full service. I used to have to bring it to Managua, which is kind of a pain in the butt, but now I live near Messiah. I can take it into the shop for a full service, oil change. They literally take the whole bike apart and re-oil, re-lube everything, check the cables, check the brakes, reset and tune everything. Most of the local mechanics here they just basically change the oil, and that's all they do. And for like $50, they'll go over the entire bike and take really good care of it for you. So I do that essentially every 1,000 kilometers, mainly because I rev the living hell out of this thing, and it's only got it's a 1 quart of oil. So you know that oil is working really hard. So I replace it. I do more maintenance on this thing than necessary. So I've been really looking forward to upgrading. I've got some really great Dunlop tires. I'm doing 17s on the bike again. The 250 has a 21 on the front, which I definitely don't need. Like, I'm not going over logs and stuff. You know, I'm going over some moderate dirt roads. Sometimes I have to go through a little mud, so that's why I have these kind of dual sport tires on it. I'm really impressed with the Kendall. A lot of the Kendall is a Vietnamese tire. A lot of the Chinese tires are nylon, so if they get really hot from doing a lot of highway speeds, you can have problems. These are still tubes, which is basically taking some getting used to for me. But yeah, having Dunlop street tires it's like a off-road tire is going to be great, because I'll have the confidence to know that I've got a really, really good tire. This thing's pretty much bone stock other than the headlight. I added the crash guards, which came in handy. I laid this thing down on a hill going down to a volcano. It was mossy and it just slipped, and I cut these off. Sometimes the shorter brake levers and clutch levers are hard to find. Just in case, like when I did dump that bike, it broke the brake lever off and I had to ride back with just the rear brake. So in order to avoid that happening again, I just cut those off. If I was going to be keeping this bike, I would get shorter levers. I would get an aftermarket exhaust just to kind of open it up a little bit. I'd probably replace the carburetor. But it's just fine. It works great. It's, you know, this bike is $1,500 brand new. And it's done incredibly well. I just love these little single cylinder bikes. I mean, they're just so much fun to ride. Particularly, you know, it'd be one thing, like I've ridden Tracer 900s, I've ridden FJ, you know, the FJ 1300s, but that's, you know, when you're in the States and you're going down Route 65 and you can do 130 miles an hour, or you're going down the highway in Wyoming, you know, it's a little different than when you're here in Nicaragua, where the maximum speed's 80 kilometers an hour, even on the freeways. And you've got cows coming out on the road and all sorts of things. But this is an absolute perfect bike for here. Well, the step up, the 6-speed 250 is the perfect bike for me, because I need a little bit more power, a little bit more torque, because going up the mountains and stuff, this thing, it does the job, but it's working way too hard. So upgrading to just a little bit bigger bike. And I thought about getting a Yamaha or a Honda, but it's kind of one of those things, like the Yamaha, the equivalent Yamaha is like $5,000. The equivalent Honda is like $6,000 or $7,000. It's like, why would I, you know, if this bike gets stolen, or if it breaks, or if something happens to it, like, it's $1,500, right? And I can just put a little bit of money into this to get some aftermarket parts. And as long as I do the regular maintenance on it, it's going to be just as decent as the Honda. It might not last as long down the road, but I think one of the reasons these don't last as long is because the Nikas just don't do the regular maintenance on it like I do. Like, I'm totally on top of the maintenance here. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. And plus, it blends in. Like, the parts, like when my ignition stopped working, it was late on a Sunday night, and I convinced the restaurant I was at in Granada to let me park the bike inside overnight. Called my taxi driver. He brought the mechanic to my bike and to me. We walked over to the parts store. We had an ignition. I think it was $10. My mechanic hot wired the bike, drove it to his shop. 15 minutes later, he had the new ignition on. I think the total cost with taxi was less than $30 for everything. So parts are readily available for these here, whereas the Japanese bikes, it's a little hard to get. They're a little more expensive, and the aftermarket parts are actually really good for these things. So, and you don't stand out as much. Like, if you're on a really fancy Honda or Yamaha, and I might get myself, you know, as time goes on, I might get myself a nicer Yamaha or something. But, you know, I stand out enough as it is. But being on a bike that's, you know, ultra expensive for here, just makes you stand out even more. So I'm very happy with this bike. I'm going to miss it, actually. The one thing I am going to miss is the 250 does not have the kickstart. And if you're doing off-road stuff, like if you're up in Multigalpa, Esteli in the mountains, you want to have that kickstart. But still, you know, you can always push start or roll it down a hill. But that kickstart is really handy. I am going to miss that. The 250 does not have the kickstart. It's just electric start. So that will be something that I will miss. But this bike's been a lot of fun. Hopefully in the next week or two, I'll have the new bike, get the new tires and rims put on it. I'm turning it into more or less a supermoto. So there you go. There's my thoughts on the Genesis 150. I'll tell you what, there's nothing better than being on like a smaller adventure style bike. Just bombing down some of the roads and going off-road on these things is amazing. Like, I don't think I'll ever go back to, you know, regularly riding big, well, one thing here in Nicaragua, I've seen a lot of sport bikes here, big sport bikes, but it's just a good way to get yourself killed. Like, the bike is just too much for these roads, and even in the States in some places. But there's no reason to have one of those big, massive bikes here. This thing's great, gets great gas mileage. I think I spend like $4 a week on gas here, and I put some pretty good miles on this thing. I put 12,000 miles on this thing, or 12,000 kilometers on this thing in like literally 6 months. So pretty neat. But there's a few thoughts for you, and I hope you have yourself a good day.